New Orleans Saints rookie Kool-Aid McKinstry may be young, but it doesn't mean that he won't have an impact his rookie season. We got all that and a little bit of lanyard for you on today's episode of Locked On Saints.
You are Locked On Saints, your daily New Orleans Saints podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is good, Who Dat Nation and Who Dat family? I am your host, your friend Ross Jackson, New Orleans native, your New Orleans Saints expert and credentialed member of the media covering those New Orleans Saints as a senior writer and reporter over at Saints News Network. And on today's episode of Locked On Saints, we're taking a look at three young defensive players who could have an unexpected or X-Factor-like impact in 2024. We'll take a look at defensive tackle Bryan Bresee and what he can do that will make it very hard to keep him off the field in 2024. We'll take a look at safety Johnathan Abram and how he is going to be key to the New Orleans Saints' success on the defensive side of the football this year. And we're going to kick things off by taking a look at rookie cornerback Kool-Aid McKinstry. He may be a rookie, but that doesn't mean that he won't have an impact right out of the gate. We got all that and more coming up for you on today's episode. We appreciate you very much, as always, making Locked On Saints your first listen of the day every day, and for being an everydayer here on the show, which is a proud part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Saints brought to you by our friends at Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off of your first purchase. Terms apply. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed at Game Time. Now, look, the New Orleans Saints got themselves an absolute steal, trading up in the second round of the 2024 NFL Draft and selecting Alabama cornerback Kool-Aid McKinstry. Now, look, on a lot of other teams, Kool-Aid McKinstry is already a starter, right? I know he's coming back from the foot injury. I know he hasn't really been able to get started in terms of doing like team drills and all those stuff. Just got to the point where he was doing individual drills at the end of mandatory mini camps. But going into training camp, he's expected to compete not only on the outside, but on the inside, in the slot as well. So he has two different paths to potentially end up competing his way to making an immediate rookie impact. But that's not the only way. And Kool-Aid McKinstry does not need to win a starting role in order to have an impact his rookie season. That's what I want to break down here today as we take a look at these defensive players that can have sort of these unexpected or X-Factor-like impacts in 2024 and what's going to be a major year. We're going to go over three of the players that I think, and then I've got some contributions from our insiders group as well that I want to make sure that I go over. But starting with Kool-Aid McKinstry here, one of the other ways that Kool-Aid McKinstry ends up having an impact his rookie season just comes down to injury. For lack of better phrase, or, you know, without trying to put too much out there in terms of like bad juju or bad voodoo or anything like that, it's just unlikely that all three of your, as we expect right now, starting cornerbacks, Marshawn Lattimore, Paul Adebo on the outside, Alontae Taylor on the inside, it's just unlikely that all three of those guys will play all 17 games. In fact, it's unlikely that they each individually play all 17 games. So I highlighted earlier that McKinstry is not only going to compete to, you know, for his role on the outside, he's going to be competing on the inside as well. So there's a world in which Marshawn Lattimore misses a game, but it's not the same game that Alontae Taylor and Paul Adebo miss. Or Paul Adebo misses a game, but it's not the same that Marshawn Lattimore or Alontae Taylor miss, and so on and so forth. It's likely or possible that all three of those guys miss individual games, and so therefore Kool-Aid McKinstry ends up playing at all three spots or ends up playing on the outside and on the inside. You could just take, if Lattimore is hurt, you can bump Adebo up to the number one corner and then have Kool-Aid start on the outside. You could move Alontae outside and have Kool-Aid start in the slot, whichever way you want to go with that. It just means that he doesn't have to have a starting role to have an impact. And then you look ahead to 2025 and all these other things where there's a real opportunity for him to just be a starter at that point. But for New Orleans, I think this is where they're most comfortable. They're comfortable having four starting caliber cornerbacks for exactly this reason, so that when one of them misses a game, they can go to the fourth guy and not have a drop off in terms of talent. And if you look at what Kool-Aid did his entire time at Alabama, playing the press man coverage, being physical off the line of scrimmage, being able to keep pace with top flight SEC future NFL wide receivers, forcing quarterbacks to not even want to throw his way his final season. There's a lot of focus on the fact that he had so few takeaways and all these other things, but really the reason why he had so few takeaways is because for like the entirety of his final year, quarterbacks just didn't even throw his way, didn't even look his way. So taking away the option is just as valuable as taking away the football in some cases, because you can force bad throws into traffic, all these other things. And so if he's able to be a lockdown guy like that, not only does him stepping in place of an injury give him the opportunity to have a major impact, but what if he steps in place of an injury for a player that could potentially be moved at the trade deadline, like an Alontae Taylor? Or if the New Orleans Saints and Paulson Adebo don't reach a contract extension before the season begins, what happens if he ends up stepping in place of an injured Paulson Adebo and the Saints end up getting some phone calls from the trade deadline that become and generate really interesting conversation? You know that Kool-Aid McKinstry is eventually going to be on the field instead of one of the three guys that we expect to be starting on the field. Maybe not necessarily in 2024, but 2025, 2026, whatever. You didn't draft him unless that was the case and unless that was the eventual expectation for him. So what happens if he steps in place of one of these guys when they're injured for, let's say, 2 games, 3 games, and he balls out? Do you take him off the field again because the other guy's healthy? I mean, we've already seen the New Orleans Saints are not afraid to bench a player when they are coming back from injury because the guy that stepped in place of them for injury did something that they liked better. I'm not going to say was better, because I don't think that Andy Dalton was better than Jameis Winston, but whatever he was doing, the Saints liked for whatever reason. And so could that end up being something that happens with Kool-Aid McKinstry? Now, I think if I'm the New Orleans Saints, I want to play that as smart as possible. I'm maximizing these 4 guys as best as I can. And a big part of maximizing these 4 guys is that if one of them goes away for injury and then you have Kool-Aid McKinstry step in, once that starter is ready to come back, that starter should get their job back. Then you keep Kool-Aid McKinstry waiting in the wings to step in place of somebody else. I don't see anything wrong with that at all, but it does create an intriguing conversation. And those conversations get even more intriguing when other NFL teams around the league are dealing with injury at the position and get really, really desperate and start making phone calls, start making offers and things like that. So not only does the impact that Kool-Aid McKinstry could potentially have his rookie year take place on the field, but it could impact how the roster changes and the jobs that other guys have or don't have during the season. That is X factor impact. You know what I'm saying? Like, that's maybe more than X factor impact. So just something to keep an eye out on throughout the 2024 season. And again, I think keeping all 4 of these guys as long as you can is the right move in whatever configuration makes the most sense. But I'm very interested and a little excited as well to see how Kool-Aid McKinstry's rookie year goes. Really intrigued to see him out in training camp beginning later on this month as well. Coming up next, one guy that's not necessarily fighting for a starting spot, but is already in line for one, safety Johnathan Abram, could be key to the New Orleans Saints defensive success because of what he and Tyrann Mathieu have already proven they can do together. We got that coming up for you as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Saints brought to you by our friends at Game Time. Game Time is my favorite place to go for last-minute tickets, especially throughout the MLB season. As you've probably seen and or heard and or understand, I've been traveling a lot. So if ever I want to pick up the app and see if there's a baseball game around where I am, maybe I get an opportunity to go and see somebody that I would have never gotten to see otherwise, especially living in New Orleans where there is no MLB team. Game Time is awesome when I'm on the road, and trust, I will be using it a ton when we're in Orange County in LA throughout New Orleans Saints training camp. I suggest that you use it too. All-in pricing, you can toggle that on so that no fees and stuff like that take you by surprise. Last minute tickets, people save up to 60% on buying their last minute tickets with Game Time, and views from the seats, so you always know what it is that you're buying. So you can take all the guesswork out of buying tickets to the MLB by using Game Time today. Just download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Once again, download the app and create an account and redeem that code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Game Time, last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. All right, right, family. New Orleans Saints safety Johnathan Abram is going to be key to the New Orleans Saints defensive success in 2024 if he wins the role next to Tyrann Mathieu, because those two work incredibly well together. That's what we got coming up for you here as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints. We appreciate you very much for making us your first listen of the day every day. Don't forget to also go and check out Locked On Sports Today. If you've been listening to like ESPN, Fox Sports, all of this stuff, hearing all the yelling and screaming, probably tired of it, having to turn your volume down all the time and all of this stuff, you can make the switch over to Locked On Sports Today. It is a 24/7 streaming channel programmed to bring you the biggest news from around the world of sports with the local experts that know the teams the absolute best. They cover them every single day. And of course, without all the yelling and screaming and arguing. So go and check them out today. You can find it on the Locked On Sports Today YouTube page, 24/7 stream. You can also find it on the Amazon Fire TV channels app for free as well. Part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So look, I've been a big proponent of Jordan Howden, Johnathan Abram, Tyrann Mathieu, Will Harris, this entire safety group, really, the New Orleans Saints are bringing in to the 2024 season. And while I think that Jordan Howden is going to be a long time, good, strong, I was going to say strong safety, but you know what I mean? Like not strong safety, but like strong safety, strong player at safety. Gonna do good. Guy have a good career is what I'm trying to say. But I don't know if that really gets off the ground here in 2024. It might be more of a 2025, 2026 thing for Jordan Howden because his skill set is a little bit more akin to what it is that Tyrann Mathieu does than what you want the guy next to Tyrann Mathieu doing. Although Howden will get his opportunities to do exactly that. So until then, though, it looks like Johnathan Abram is in line to start next to Tyrann Mathieu. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to speak about this in terms of Johnathan Abram because we've seen Tyrann Mathieu and Johnathan Abram do this already. But I want to caveat that with if Jordan Howden gets the opportunities playing down in the box, improves in that area, shows that he can do that, if he can achieve the same things, it will be Jordan Howden who will be a key, major key to the New Orleans Saints finding success on the defensive side of the football. You get what I'm saying? So I'm going to talk about this in terms of Johnathan Abram because that's who we think the Saints are going to go with at this time, and we've seen them do it. But this could apply to Jordan Howden if he checks these boxes playing that position as well. So the big thing that I want to highlight, and the big thing that I always highlight when it comes to those final two games against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and the Atlanta Falcons to wrap up the 2023 season, was the communication between Johnathan Abram and Tyrann Mathieu and the rest of the defense. And all of the responsibility that comes with that. It's not just communicating with the safety next to you or the cornerback next to you. It's communicating clearly down to the linebackers to make sure that those calls make it accurately down to the defensive line. It's making sure that people are going where they need to be and that they're adjusting based on motion and all these other things. When somebody goes in motion and they're moving from one side of the field to the other and the defense needs to shift, it's a lot of the safeties that are driving some of that communication, both with one another, but then also with the rest of the defense. And Johnathan Abram and Tyrann Mathieu did that extremely well last year. One of the other things that I always highlight too is that Johnathan Abram is a very good tone setter. We meant to do this last year, and don't let me forget this year, please, when we get into the regular season. And in fact, don't let me forget it when we get into training camp too, because it might be useful then. But we were going to do this thing last year because we were entering sort of the next realm of the post CJ Gardner-Johnson era. And we were talking about how there needed to be that energy guy, that dog, that guy that brought that energy, the swag, the confidence, all these other things to the New Orleans Saints defense. And we were going to do the dog of the week. Hey, remember that? And I forgot about it all season long. I'm so sorry, but we'll try to remember for this season. And I'm going to give an early vote to Johnathan Abram taking home the most of those weekly ones for being the dog of the week because of the energy that he brings. He flies around the field. There's not an area of the field where he doesn't pursue. And what I mean by that is that if he is playing down in the box and he's kind of guarding sort of this intermediate, let's call it 7 to 14 yard range or something like that. It's not accurate, but let's just say that's what he's worried about. But then the ball travels 25 yards, it goes over his head, he's not just watching the ball go over his head, he's turning up field and pursuing the play. If he's 30 yards away, 20 yards away from the line of scrimmage, and the ball gets thrown to the 1 yard line, he's trying to get downhill to make the play. This is one of the things that I love about Johnathan Abram. One of my favorite things about him coming out of college was that there was never a time, even though he might not have been considered like a sideline to sideline coverage guy, right? He's not somebody you're going to have be the middle of the field lone defender, right? The solo single high safety or anything like that. Typically don't want to put him in those situations, but if he's the middle of the field safety in a cover 3 and the ball is thrown 5 yards ahead of the line of scrimmage, he's crashing down from that deep center safety spot and trying to come down and make a play as close to the line of scrimmage as possible, trying to limit the yards after catch. He just plays with that wherever the ball is, it's my responsibility to be there too type of mentality. And I think that is such a refreshing thing to see, not necessarily from the New Orleans Saints. That's kind of how they coach it. Marcus Williams was much the same way. Von Bell was absolutely the same way. Tyrann Mathieu is absolutely the same way. But what does it make a difference when you have two of those guys on the field at the same time? And Johnathan Abram just does this. And so the reason why I highlight it so specifically is because it is still kind of surprising to see at the position on an NFL level, right? The New Orleans Saints coach that. Dennis Allen, Marcus Robertson, Joe Woods, they coach, and especially Marcus Robertson, who works very closely with the safeties, they coach that level of aggression. But I do think that aggression ends up fueling the rest of the defense as well. So you love a guy that can be out there and talk trash. You love a guy that can be out there, go out there and make plays, that can deliver big hits, that will crash down and make those kind of plays near the line of scrimmage that get overlooked and that are tough to make, and run support and all those other things. I think that he's just one of those dudes. And so if he's able to continue with the communication that he ended the season with, along with Tyrann Mathieu, if he's able to continue to make plays all over the field in that way, in terms of crashing down to make some of those plays after the catch, in the run game, all that kind of stuff, and if he's able to impact the football the way that we saw specifically against Tampa, where he was responsible for 3-4 turnovers during that game, or played some role in multiple turnovers in that game, then yeah, I think he's a key to the New Orleans Saints' success in 2024. And again, if it's not him and it's Jordan Howden, if Jordan Howden checks those same 3 boxes, you better believe it's Jordan Howden that we're talking about that has that major impact. So really, really excited to see kind of how this all unfolds. But man, I think Johnathan Abram is just such a good fit for what it is that the New Orleans Saints want out of their safety play, what they want as a partner to Tyrann Mathieu, and what they want as a part of their defense, right? As a motivator for the defense. It just makes so much sense. So I think Johnathan Abram will have and play a key role in the New Orleans Saints defensive success in 2024, should he maintain and win that spot next to Tyrann Mathieu. Coming up next, somebody down in the trenches has the opportunity to really strengthen that defensive line, and its second-year defensive tackle, Bryan Bresee. Let's go over what it is that he can do that will make it very hard to keep him off the field in 2024. We got that coming up for you as we continue on and wrap up today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Let's get it, Who Dat Nation. When it comes down to defensive tackle Bryan Bresee, coming back for his second year, his ability to prove aggression and production in both the run game and the pass rush are going to make it really, really hard to keep him off the field in 2024. We got that coming up for you here as we continue on and wrap up today's episode of Locked On Saints. Coming up in tomorrow's episode, because we are your team every day, we're going to dive into, take a look at 3 players that could be traded during the season, before the season, whichever way. And of course, a lot of that conversation centers around the New Orleans Saints cornerback positions. We're going to break all of that down here in tomorrow's episode as we continue to look ahead to the 2024 season. Then starting next week, we're starting our look ahead to training camp as well. What are some of the big storylines that we're looking at? We're going to deep dive into each storyline that we can dig up all throughout the next couple of weeks leading into when we're in California covering New Orleans Saints training camp, which, yes, Locked On Saints, Ross Jackson, we will be there. John Hendricks, myself, Second and Saints News Network, we will be there. You're not going to miss a beat when it comes to New Orleans Saints training camp. So we got that coming up for you in tomorrow's episode. So I want to highlight here as we wrap up, and before I get to some of the insider selections of defensive players that could have that unexpected X factor like impact in 2024, I want to take a look at Bryan Bresee. Bryan Bresee had a very successful first season. 4.5 sacks, as a rookie, getting back into the back of the backfield. That was a lot of, I use the word back a lot in that one. But yes, getting back into the backfield to make plays in the run game. Continuing to kind of develop and grow over the course of the season. You really saw him get better and better and better as the year rolled on, which is exactly what you wanted to see from him. 4.5 sacks, 7 tackles for a loss, 9 additional hits on the quarterback, as well as 24 combined tackles. Did a little bit of everything, and it was really great to see. And I think that he takes another step going into 2024. I've discussed the veterans, Colin Saunders and Nathan Shepard, who are both the defensive tackles that are veteran, experienced defensive tackles going into their second year in the New Orleans Saints system, and how being in that second year ends up having a major impact for their ability to have an impact, because then they get to do some of the ornamentation, some of the unique special things that they do as players now that more comfortably, more freely, now that they feel completely solidified in understanding what the system is asking them to do. And Bryan Bresee now gets the opportunity to do the same thing. Remember, Bresee was somebody coming into the NFL when the Saints drafted him back in 2023, that we looked at as a player that coming in as a penetrating 3-tech pass rush contributor. And that ended up being true. He got better and better there, while having early success there as well, early flashes there, then got a little bit more consistent. But then in addition to that, you saw his ability to impact in the run game as well. And I think that the combination of those two things, him being able to take that next step forward and being a more consistent threat in both areas of the game, it's going to be really tough to keep him off the field. Like, he might lead all defensive tackles for New Orleans, should he stay healthy, in snaps by the end of the season over on the defensive side. And I think if that is the case, that's a really good sign. That means that there was no second year slump, right? Because if there is, you can go to Nathan Shepard. If there is, you can go to Colin Saunders, right? There's these other areas where you can try different players or try different configurations of players and stuff like that. You wouldn't have to leave Bryan Bresee out there while he's struggling. But I just get the feeling he's not going to struggle that much going into this year. He just looked so NFL ready last season and did a good job staying healthy, did a good job staying clean, all those other things, and did a good job being an impact player and rotated quite a bit throughout the season as well, which is not out of the ordinary for a rookie that's coming in, but played just 49% of defensive snaps last year. That's it, just 49%. That is, and this is true, less than 50%. That's less than half the snaps. And so he was somebody that, just like we kind of talked about with Cameron Jordan in yesterday's or in two episodes ago, we were taking a look at players that can have these, that have something to prove in 2024. It doesn't necessarily, you don't necessarily have to be a guy out there rushing the passer 80% of the time in order to be effective. Sometimes being more sparsely and strategically and intentionally utilized makes you more effective, more efficient as a defensive player, as a pass rusher. And so maybe that's what worked for Bryan Bresee last year. But this year, I think it's going to be tough. It's just going to be tough to keep him off the field. It feels like he needs to be out there and feels like he needs to continue to develop that impact. How many sacks? Like, if Bryan Bresee ends the 2024 season with 6 or more sacks, that's really, really good for a defensive tackle. Really, really good for a defensive tackle, and especially for a young defensive tackle. And then you just build his career from there. And then if he's able to also contribute in the run game, then he's not coming off the field or then he's still hitting the field on 1st and 10. And that's part of the thing that makes his game even more dangerous as well as a pass rusher, is if he can still be out there for the rundowns. That way, he's out there no matter what, and defenses are having to deal with him in every phase of the game, as opposed to him being a specialized pass rush player, package player, where they just know, okay, he's going to go after the quarterback, double team him in the middle, he'll be fine, or whatever. It's like, That's a big thing. And then if he starts getting double teamed in the middle, here's where the rest of his impact happens. He starts getting doubled in the impact or in the middle of the defense. And then all of a sudden, Cam Jordan or Chase Young or Carl Granderson or whatever combination of the three are all getting one-on-ones on the outside. Fantastic. Fantastic. You'll take that 10 times out of 10 if you're the New Orleans Saints in 2024. So I think Bryan Bresee is set to have a really, really big impact and really strengthen the entire defensive line with his performance. Not just because of what it is that he will be able to do, but because of the opportunities that he could create for one-on-ones for any of those other positions along the defensive line and allow those guys to be able to win those matchups and make some big plays. I want to give a couple shout outs here to Brandon and Cameron, who also talked about Bryan Bresee. They also selected Bryan Bresee from our insider group. We had another couple of folks. Alan mentioned both Peyton Turner and Isaiah Foskey. Drew, Molly, and a couple of others mentioned Pete Werner as well. I really liked the selection of Peyton Turner and Isaiah Foskey because I think the thing that's really interesting about them is that like their opportunities are 100% now there for them, right? Tano Passanio dealing with that injury, those two guys coming in and, you know, putting together 4 or 5 sacks each or whatever would go a long way in terms of their conversation, in terms of the conversation around them and how they continue to develop and how they get their future chances at the position and everything too. BJ also talks about Isaiah Foskey, and Foskey's been putting in a lot of work. Foskey's been working really hard because he's been working with Cam along with Carl Granderson and Peyton Turner, who are out at Cam's Sack Summit. But Isaiah has also been working with Aaron Donald's coach and everything too, like working with I don't know if it's pass rush coach or trainer or whatever, but working with some of Aaron Donald's people. Like he's putting in a lot of work this offseason to try to take a step forward from his rookie year. So I think that let's see if it works. Let's see if it ends up happening for him. But yeah, no, I love seeing the work that he's been doing. Sean also mentioned Kool-Aid. Chris mentioned Jordan as well. Molly had mentioned Pete Werner. So there's a lot. One of the other ones that I really like too was Cameron also mentioning Will Harris. Will Harris is really interesting because he could have a big time impact as a depth player because of all the different places and areas that he can play over on the defensive side. You need a slot corner. You need an outside corner. You need a free safety. You need a strong safety. Cool. You could fall back on Will Harris if you really needed to. It's kind of like a younger version of PJ Williams, right? Today's version of PJ Williams. So I love all of the contributions from the insiders. If you want to contribute as an insider as well, just text HUDAT to 504-285-7473. Follow the prompts, join up, 14 days for free, $4.99 a month. After that, you'll be the first to get everything following training camp. You also click the link in the description wherever you're enjoying the show. All right, y'all. We appreciate you very much. As always, make a Locked On Saints your first listen of the day every day. Don't forget, we'll be back tomorrow. Take a look at 3 players that could potentially be traded before the season starts or by the trade deadline and all the conversation that circulates around the New Orleans Saints cornerback position. And no, I'm not talking about Marshawn Lattimore all by himself. Make sure you come back for that. And of course, don't forget to go and check out the rest of Locked On Louisiana. Matt Moscona over at Locked On LSU, keeping you up to date with everything going on in recruiting for LSU. And of course, over with Locked On Pelicans and Jake Madison. Will the Pelicans make another move? It sure sounds like they want to. Go and get the latest on your New Orleans Pelicans with Jake Madison over at Locked On Pels. We appreciate you very much. As always, make it Locked On Saints a part of your day, part of your routine for saying yes to me on the show. As always, if you see me, please say hi. And if you need anything else around your New Orleans Saints in between these episodes, make sure you follow me on your favorite social media at Ross Jackson, NOLA. Hit me up. Let me know how the family's doing. Let me know how you living. Let me know how you momming them. And trust that nation. I'll holla at you. Gonna do good.